John was listening to John. John had his thoughts between his two ears. That's what he was listening to. And as an alcoholic, as an addict, I know I can relate. I can convince myself of anything. And John was convincing himself of whatever he wanted to convince himself of. That's a dangerous place to live, between your own two ears. We need someone else to give us feedback. Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of I Love Being Sober, sponsored by 𝐾amelback Recovery, Arizona's preferred sober living option to help AA newcomers stay sober during their first year in the program. If that's you or someone you know, then you're in the right place, because my name is Tim Westbrook, and I'm the CEO and founder of 𝐾amelback Recovery here in the always sunny and always sober Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have helped thousands of people to stop their suffering and continue on their path to recovery. Let's get clear on one thing. We believe that a relapse or a slip is not a part of recovery. And that's exactly why this podcast is dedicated to you or any loved one you know in their first year of striving to live a clean and sober life. The purpose of this podcast is to come clean with all of the misinformation that's out there about recovery, addiction treatment, mental illness, and the strategies to stay sober in general. So if you believe you're in the right place, or if you know someone who is struggling with addiction, it's my privilege to share this podcast with you. Now, I have no idea if you and I have ever met, but what I do know is that AA saved my life. And I also know that to find long-term recovery and live happy, joyous, and free, it is not just about stopping your drinking, drugging, gambling, sexual indiscretions, or any other addiction you may have struggled with or suffered from. Because at 𝐾amelback Recovery, we believe that sobriety can and should be fun. And look, any recovery process is not easy. It is challenging, it can sometimes be annoying, and for the most of us, it is often difficult to stay on the path. But here's the good news. The self-awareness you gain from listening to this podcast, especially if you are in your first year of recovery, will help you make better choices, which will ultimately lead you to living a kick-ass sober life. Visit 𝐾amelbackrecovery.com to learn more about our treatment strategies for alcoholism, drug addiction, or mental illness. And we even offer recovery coaching so that you can enjoy the freedom and happiness you've always searched for. Welcome to the 78th episode of I Love Being Sober, the show devoted to people in their first year of sobriety. If you are pressed for time, listen at 1.5 times speed and you will still get all of the content from this episode. No need to take notes because I've paid a professional note taker to do that for you. The notes to this and other episodes are available when you look for them at ilovebeingsober.com. Please do that when you're done listening to this episode. You'll be glad you did, and that's my personal pledge to you for listening in its entirety. Now, although your first year in sobriety is central to our discussions, you and I will also explore other fascinating and important topics such as health and fitness, self-care, food and nutrition, breath work, and biohacking, just to name a few. All of these things are your gateway to living a kick-ass sober life, which is our mantra at 𝐾amelback Recovery. In this episode number 78, you'll learn about the first mistake that newcomers make that leads to a relapse, along with how to avoid it. This is mistake number 1. You'll discover that trying to stay clean and sober on your own is one of the mistakes people make that leads to a slip, along with why it is so important to avoid this mistake if you want to avoid a relapse. I will share my experience with this and how I was able to avoid this mistake. I'm also going to share another story with another guy that I'm sponsoring. Based upon what you hear, you'll be able to figure out how it works for you. So lean in and listen carefully, because this episode could have a significant impact on how you can make it to a year and much closer to living a kick-ass sober life. Also, this podcast is like an AA meeting or like a 12-step meeting in that everyone here listening is either clean and sober, struggling to stay clean and sober, thinking about getting clean and sober, or whatever it may be. So if you hear anything or if you learn anything that resonates with you throughout this episode, please let us know in the comment section of YouTube or Apple iTunes or wherever you're listening. What you share might resonate with someone else and possibly save them from a relapse or even save their life. Every review and every comment gets us that much closer to helping one more person or one more family. So don't be shy and be sure to share what resonates with you in the comment section. The first mistake you must be aware of if you want to avoid a slip is trying to stay clean and sober on your own. Your best thinking got you where you are today. You cannot do this on your own. You must seek help. You must put yourself in the middle of the herd. So first, I want to tell you the story of a guy named John. John is a guy that I sponsor. He's smart, he's charismatic, he's successful in business, he's a professional speaker, he speaks all around the world, he's a great salesman, and I would say he's a high bottom drunk. Some people say there's no such thing as a high bottom drunk. I believe, for all intents and purposes, he was a high bottom drunk. And he got sober over 30 years ago for the first time, and he had over 10 years of sobriety at one point, and he thought that he graduated. And then, of course, he started back to the drinking, and which led to the drug use, which led to the incomprehensible demoralization that happens when an addict or an alcoholic goes back down that path. And he came to me a few years ago, and I started working with him, and I started sponsoring him. And he actually didn't live in Scottsdale, Arizona. He moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, and I knew him from a different mastermind group that I'm a part of. But he came to me when he moved to Scottsdale and said, "Hey man, you don't know this about me, but I'm in the program and I just got clean and sober." And he told me his whole story about how he was sober. He got sober in New York, and then he went back to the drinking, and his life, of course, spun out of control. Optically, he had his life together, but on the inside, he was not doing very well, to say the least. So when he moved back to Scottsdale, Arizona, or not back, he moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, I connected with him and he asked me to be a sponsor. And so I started working with him and we worked the steps. He got in shape spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, in all of those areas. We worked together in all those areas, which if you've ever sponsored somebody, or sponsoring someone else is the best thing that you can do to stay on the path yourself. So I got to work with him. We worked the steps. We went to lots of meetings. We went to a couple of AA retreats together. He stayed connected to the rooms of AA. He had a good, solid morning routine that included prayer, meditation, gratitude list. We all stay connected. There's a bunch of us. There's about a dozen of us that stay connected. We have a text string, which as of this recording, it's 2022. So we text our gratitude list, but then we also speak on the phone daily. We were speaking on the phone daily. We met in person every single week, and we did step work, and we went to meetings together. There are a lot of things that we did together, which helped me stay sober, and it helped him stay sober, and it helped him stay in the middle. He wasn't trying to do it on his own. His life started getting better, and his focus shifted. He slowly drifted away. The daily calls turned into sporadic text messages or voice text messages. Seeing him in person at meetings and getting together for coffee stopped. He stopped seeing his therapist. He went from being connected to being isolated, and he worked virtually. So again, it's 2022. So working virtually is something that happens, and the opposite of human connection is addiction. So he became disconnected, not only from AA, not only from the 12-step community, not only from me, his sponsor, his therapist, he also became disconnected to the world. And he went from getting feedback and listening to others to listening to himself. He wasn't around other people. He was by himself. John was listening to John. John had his thoughts between his two ears. That's what he was listening to. And as an alcoholic, as an addict, I know I can relate. I can convince myself of anything. And John was convincing himself of whatever he wanted to convince himself of. That's a dangerous place to live, between your own two ears. We need someone else to give us feedback. John needed somebody outside of John to give him feedback, give him direction, give him guidance. And I know for myself, Tim needs somebody else besides Tim. So trying to do it on your own, it just doesn't work. And in the case of John, I literally saw it happening, which is one of the gifts of being a sponsor. Granted, I want everybody to stay clean and sober. I don't see it as a failure as a sponsor watching someone else go out, but I get to learn from it. I got to learn, I got to watch what happened with John and how he went from being connected to being disconnected, how I saw him go from being in the middle of the herd to being on the fringes to next thing you know, he took a trip to Vancouver to visit his girlfriend. And so he was already disconnected. He was already on the fringe. His focus shifted from AA and from recovery. It doesn't have to be AA either. It can be smart recovery. It can be anything. Whatever it is that you do, AA is what worked for me. The 12-step program is what works for me. Regardless, recovery needs to be the focus. And his focus went from recovery to now he's in a relationship, which one of the things that is recommended is that you don't date for a year when you first get clean and sober. So he started dating a little bit before a year. It was almost a year though. Regardless, his focus shifted. And so he took a trip to Vancouver to visit his girlfriend for 6 weeks. This is a 6-week trip. He's already disconnected from the rooms of AA. He's not staying connected to men in recovery, people in recovery. And after 2 weeks of being in Vancouver, I get a text from his girlfriend. She says, "Hey, John's been drinking. I found," and she sent me a text, a bunch of bottles of booze that she found in the bottom of his trash can. So luckily, she caught him pretty quickly. He didn't get so bad that he needed to go back to detox. The point of this story, though, is that he was disconnected. He was trying to do it on his own. Doing it on your own doesn't work. He was in another country. And so, again, he thought he graduated. And so he's in another country. Nobody will know. Who knows what was going on? I didn't hear from him. He didn't call me during the 2 weeks that he was in Vancouver. Next thing you know, he relapses. So now he's back in the rooms. He's clean and sober. I think his relapse lasted about a week or less than a week anyways. He's back to doing the deal. He's in the middle of the herd. He's not just staying on the fringe. He calls me daily. He's hitting meetings on a regular basis. We meet weekly. We meet every Wednesday. Wednesday morning, we meet for step work before we hit a meeting, and then we hit a 6:45 meeting. We've gone through the steps again. He's actually on step 9 right now as of this recording. He went back to seeing his therapist on a regular basis. This time, he's sponsoring guys. He currently has 2 sponsees that he's taking through the steps, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about sponsorship later on in this episode. Sponsoring another person is the absolute best way to create another layer of accountability and to help you stay in the middle of the herd. So for me, my story of staying in the middle, when I first got clean and sober, so I'm going to talk about myself and my story and how I was able to, I didn't try to do this deal on my own. I got clean and sober. My sobriety date is March 8th, 2011. I went to meetings and I think I got a sponsor my second meeting that I went to my second day. And during my first year, I went to 1 or 2 meetings a day. I had a sponsor. I called my sponsor every single day and I called him. I didn't text him. Actually, when I got sober, texting wasn't even really a thing yet. So I called him, and if he didn't answer, I left him a message. He didn't always answer. Hey, as a sponsee, your job is to call your sponsor. He doesn't need to call you back. But what I did was I called him. I called him every single day. I started doing yoga and other things and hiking Piestewa Peak, hiking Camelback Mountain. And I was doing these things mostly with people in recovery because that was my focus. My focus was recovery. So I went to lots of meetings. I had a sponsor. I worked the steps. I started sponsoring guys towards the end of that first year. I went to the meeting before the meeting. I went to the meeting after the meeting, which means I went to coffee. I went to breakfast. I went to dinner. I did lots of service work. Whenever I had the opportunity to do service work, I did. I was on the board of directors of Crossroads for 4 years. Actually, that didn't happen until probably year 2. Regardless, it's another way of me staying in the middle of the herd. And I knew that I couldn't do it on my own. I stayed connected to people in recovery. I did not go out and try to do it on my own. So, and speaking of sponsees, so why is it important to have sponsees? Well, sponsees, being of service, and the 12th step, carrying the message, that's one of the main pillars of AA, is giving it away, being of service, carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. You must give it away if you want to keep it. And we're all after fulfillment. That's why we lie, cheat, and steal. As addicts and alcoholics, we lie, cheat, steal because we want fulfillment. That's really what we're after is fulfillment. The real way to get fulfillment is to give it away. And when you're helping another person, there's a higher level of accountability because you have someone else that's relying on you. And when I'm taking a guy through the steps, guess what? Before I take him through step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm studying and I'm listening to YouTube videos. I'm watching YouTube videos on step 1, step 2, step 5, step 6. There are workbooks available online. And those workbooks I utilize when I take someone through the steps. And so when I bring someone else through the steps, I'm also going through the steps again. It creates a higher level of accountability, another layer of accountability. Next thing you know, I'm in the middle. I'm more in the middle because I got guys that are looking up to me. And so I don't want other people to fail, and therefore I'm the example. And this makes me think of the 4 levels of learning. 4 levels of learning. Level 1, read and listen. Level 2, speak it back. Level 3, write it down. Most important, level 4 is to teach it. So sponsoring essentially is level 4 learning. If I really want to learn and really want to build my foundation, I got to take someone else through the steps. And again, if it's not AA, it could be NA, it could be SLAA, it could be SAA, whatever fellowship, whatever program you're part of, or it could be Smart Recovery or Refuge Recovery or whatever it is, you've got to give it away if you want to keep it. This disease is deadly. You cannot do it on your own. You must surround yourself with people that you want to be like, people that have what you want, people that have been down the same path. You likely have not been able to stay clean and sober for a significant length of time, which is why you're listening to this right now. Enlist your friends, your family members, addiction professionals, people in support groups, etc. These are the people that will guide you, support you, love you, give you direction, give you good suggestions, be honest with you, not enable you, and help provide the accountability, community, and support that is necessary to achieving long-term sobriety. Be open and honest. Tell people what you are doing. Get integrated into a fellowship. Whatever that fellowship looks like, you've got to get integrated into a fellowship. You've got to get integrated into a group of people that know what you're doing, that know that you're clean and sober, that know that you want to stay clean and sober, and people that support that lifestyle, and people that also live that lifestyle. So here's a quick review about the insights you and I both rediscovered in this 78th episode of I Love Being Sober. The first mistake people make that leads to a relapse is trying to stay clean and sober on their own. We also talked about why. So we talked about why it's so important and why you need to avoid this mistake if you want to avoid a relapse. I also shared with you the story of John and how attempting to do it on his own resulted in a relapse. And I shared my story of how I stayed connected and how I stayed in the middle of the herd. I also talked about being a sponsor, which is just the best way in my experience to create another layer of accountability. Based upon what you've heard in this episode, you can figure out how it works for you. And remember, these insights will only work for you if you work them. So please make sure you apply what you've learned in this episode of I Love Being Sober, because if you do, you will be on your way to living a kick-ass sober life. I think you'll agree that's exciting to think about. And speaking of reviews, before we end this episode, I want you to go to the reviews section of iTunes or YouTube, or leave a comment in YouTube. Type in the one thing that resonated with you that you heard in this episode. Every comment counts, and what you share could resonate with someone else that is struggling and potentially save their life. You will also be asked to rate this episode. I hope that I've earned 5 stars from you. So go ahead, share the one thing that resonated with you in the reviews section of iTunes or a comment in YouTube. It'll take just 3 minutes out of your day, but what you share could not only save you, but it could also save someone's life. Okay, that does it for the week. I'm Tim Westbrook, and I hope that our paths cross again next week for I Love Being Sober, the show devoted to people in their first year of sobriety. Sound good? And do whatever it takes to join me for episode number 79, because we're going to dig into mistake number 2, expecting instantaneous results. I will share my experience with this mistake along with how to avoid it. I encourage you to invite a friend, a loved one, or a sponsee to listen to I Love Being Sober. I can't wait to connect with you then. It will be an insightful episode, so I really want you to join us with your loved one.